That light's going to be very annoying.
Is that better?
Thank you.
You'll be seeing my whole screen anyway, most of the time.
Okay.
Hi everyone, how's it going?
Hey.
Good, thanks, Pete. How are you?
Not bad, thanks. Enjoying some sun for a change in Victoria.
Just giving it a few minutes to get everyone online, that's all.
So pretty much what I'll be doing today, just while waiting for a couple of stragglers to come in, is just going through how to use iNaturalist itself and a whole lot of tips and tricks for using the site more efficiently and more effectively in terms of all the aspects. So in terms of uploading observations, making IDs, searching for data, and I'll kind of just jump around from feature to feature and spot to spot on the site, and just make sure if anyone has any questions at any time, just jump in and interrupt me and ask a question, or if you want to repeat something or clarify something, make sure you ask. Whether that's you can type something in the chat and I'll try and keep an eye on that, or just unmute and ask the question. But probably some of the stuff that I talk about you guys already know about, but hopefully I also teach you guys some new stuff as well. So I'll just give it 2 more minutes and then I'll start sharing my screen.
Okay, just letting you know that I am computer pretty illiterate, and I have only been on the iNaturalist thing once to put in something, and then I had a lot of trouble. So just letting you know that if you just don't go too fast, please. Thank you.
Yep, that's no worries at all.
Hello, is there a meeting there?
Yes, there is a meeting there. We're just waiting for a few other people to get online. Welcome.
And they're gone.
I'm hoping he heard us. I think we've probably got all we've got, Thomas.
All right, we'll get things started. Can everyone see my screen? All right. So pretty much on iNaturalist, most of the features involved in using the site, once you start using the site, they become fairly intuitive and straightforward. And obviously, the more you use the site, the easier it becomes. But there are a lot of, I guess you could call them hidden features or things that aren't as evident. That if you learn how to use those features, it makes the general iNaturalist experience a lot more enjoyable, a lot more effective, and lets you do a lot more things. So today I'll go through both of those things. I'll go through some of the more obvious things and how to use those site features, as well as some of the hidden things that a lot of people might not be aware about. So I guess I'd start with the upload screen, since that's what most people are doing on iNaturalist, is uploading observations. So if I hit the upload button, I get prompted with this screen. And there's actually two different ways that you can upload observations. You can either click choose files, and then that'll take you to folders on your computer where you can pick photos, and then all you have to do is select them with your mouse while holding down shift, and then you can click open, right?
No.
And they'll all be there. Alternatively,
So you went to observations first, is that right?
yeah. So what I'll do is I'll start again. So up here, you've got the green upload button.
Where?
Up here where my mouse is.
I can't see where your mouse is. I'm on a tiny little iPhone. Oh, there. Yeah.
The big green upload button.
Yeah. Well,
Yep,
I'm on
so
an
if you-
iPhone, so it's very hard to see stuff.
Yeah, there's not much I can do about that on my end, unfortunately. I've got the screen as big as I can make it. But once you've clicked that green upload button, then you get prompted with this screen. And then you got two choices. Either you can click choose files, the big blue button in the center. And from there, you'll be taken to folders on your computer. So wherever you got your photos stored on your computer, you navigate to that folder, and then you can select as many photos as you want. Keep in mind that you can upload as many individual photos simultaneously as you want. I've uploaded 300 or 400 at a time, but there is a limit on the individual size of photos. So no photo that you upload can be more than 20 megabytes. Now, occasions where a photo is more than 20 megabytes are really, really rare. And the only time I've really encountered that myself is if I originally shot in RAW format on my camera, and then I converted it to a JPEG or a PNG, and that creates this really bloated, really big file. But in 99.9% of the time, your photo is going to be under 20 megabytes, so there's no issue.
So
as I
you
said,
have to upload photos onto somewhere. I'm lost there. I don't know how to upload the photos, but there you go.
Yeah, so I guess the basic function of using iNaturalist is to get photos that you have taken with your camera and putting them onto the website. And to do that, you follow those steps I talked about. So you hit the green upload button, then you hit the blue choose files button here, which takes you to where the photos are on your computer.
But I don't have a computer. I've got iPhone.
Then this talk won't be so helpful for you because this is mostly using the desktop version.
Oh, that's what I asked earlier on, and I was told iPhone was okay. Okay.
iPhone was okay to view the talk.
Well, hell, honestly. Did ask. Where's
Your question was to ask whether you could watch the Zoom call on your phone, which you can.
No, the question asked, did I need to, I was an iPhone, did I need a laptop? No, I was told I could do it all on iPhone.
You can use iNaturalist on iPhone as well, but that's not what this talk is about.
Well, I was told that.
I don't think you were. I think that's your misinterpretation, but thanks for joining in. All right, hopefully I can move on now. Any other questions so far? Excellent, I can move through things a bit faster.
Can I ask a question? Sorry,
Yep.
it's Carol. Could
Yep.
you go through adding a location when you upload a photo?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll select a few photos here as an example. So let's say I select these photos that I took earlier today. And now in 99.9% of the time, the date and the time will already be there. So pretty much whatever camera or phone or device you're using, the date and the time are already stored. Most of the time when you're using your phone to take photos, the location will also automatically be uploaded because most phones these days have location tracking. But if you're taking it on most cameras, it won't be there. So in order to add a location, you click this location bar here. And once you're in the location bar, you've got two options. You can either manually scroll with your mouse and zoom in on places on the map and find the location where you took the photo. So I took this in Sydney. So if I move the map here, and we'll keep moving in. And here we go. And what I can do is click on the map. That creates a red circle. And then what I can do is I can click these white circles on the edge to expand the circle, and that increases the accuracy radius. So basically what that's doing is saying, I saw this species somewhere inside this circle. So if you know the exact point, so if I know that I saw this spider at this exact tree here, then I can just click there and I can set the accuracy to 0 because I know the exact point. Well, let's say I took this photo. Yep, I have a question. No? All right, so let's say I took this photo 5 years ago and I know I took it somewhere around my house, but I couldn't remember whether it was in the front yard, the backyard, or exactly where. I can set a point on the map and then increase the size of that circle to cover all of my house. And so now what that circle is telling anyone who looks at the observation is saying that that spider was seen somewhere inside that circle. Okay. Now, that whole process of zooming in on the map and finding the exact place is a little bit tedious. So instead, what you can do is just type in the bar here. So it's exactly like you would if you were searching for somewhere in, say, Google Maps. So if I know where I found it, I can type in the exact place and then pick the option from the drop-down menu, and it does the same thing, but it'll set the accuracy circle quite large generally. So then again, you can just manually adjust that to how you wish. You don't have to type in an exact place. If I just know that I saw it in some particular national park, so let's say Garrigal National Park, I can click that just to navigate faster instead of having to manually scroll on the map. And then I can pick exactly where I found it in certain places. There's a third option as well, which is you can change the latitude and longitude manually. So again, if you had been on a trip out into the middle of nowhere and you had no idea where you'd been in terms of looking at a map, but you'd recorded the latitude and longitude of each of your sites, then again, you can type in the latitude and longitude here. But keep in mind, it's in decimal degrees, not in degrees, minutes, seconds. Now, in terms of geoprivacy, you've got three options when you're uploading observations. The default option is open, which means that anyone can see the coordinates and they can see exactly where your observation is. The second option is obscured. And what obscured does is it randomly scrambles the true location of your observation into a large box. Now that box varies in size depending where you are on the globe because the dimensions of the box are 0.2 degrees of latitude by 0.2 degrees of longitude. And that roughly ends up being around a 20 kilometer by 20 kilometer box, so a 400 kilometer squared area, but that does change slightly depending where you are on the curvature of the Earth. And basically what you can do, you can set records to obscured if you don't want other people to see the true location. So there are a few reasons to do that. One is if, say, you've seen a whole lot of things in your backyard or in your house and you don't want to reveal where you live to other people, which is certainly fair, you can obscure it. Another reason people use obscure is, say, with orchids. So a lot of orchids, people might go out and collect them. So you can obscure the record. so that people only know that the orchid was somewhere in that 20 kilometer by 20 kilometer box. So it makes it a lot harder for them to go and collect things in the wild. Yep, Margot? Did you have a question?
I was just wondering with orchids, are you better off just making the circle bigger or going for obscured?
I mean, technically either is fine, but if you were to just make the circle bigger, you would have to make sure that when you originally set the center point where you decided to click, don't click it on the orchid, if that makes sense.
Yep, tough.
So if I'm putting a point on my house and then increasing the size of the circle, I will normally still put the center of that circle on the house, which is what a lot of people will assume. So they'll go, okay, the circle's that big, but they'll still just look for the center of the circle. So if you were to use that strategy, it would be a good idea to click the middle of the circle on some random point and then just slowly increase the radius of the circle until it covers where your orchid was. So that does allow you to control exactly where you put the circle, whereas obscured, it totally randomizes the location. So if you were to keep deleting and uploading an observation and obscuring it every time, it would keep being in a random location every time. Then there's a third option, which I tend to prefer not to use, and that's private. And what private does is it completely removes all location information. So you can't even see what continent it's on. Now, there are really, really rare cases, I would say, where that gets used. One is, let's say I want to build up a species list for my backyard, and I'm not really interested in other people using the data. It's just purely something I'm doing for myself, and I'm basically using iNaturalist just as a platform to store the data, and I don't want anyone to know where I live. Then, of course, I can set them all to private, and that's fine. Another alternative is if you've got really, really rare species, and setting them into that obscured 20 kilometer by 20 kilometer box still may not be big enough to stop poachers. So you often see that used with extremely rare snakes or reptiles in North America that are heavily, heavily poached and endangered, or sometimes with really rare flowers and things like orchids, where people are worried that even if it's obscured and it's in this huge box, that if a really good example actually where obscuration doesn't work is, say, Rottnest Island. So anything that has a conservation status of near threatened or above, so basically any endangered species that you upload automatically have their location obscured, and you can't change that. But if you look at something like quokkas, right? Quokkas are near threatened. And if you upload a quokka, its location will be obscured. But because 99% of the population is only on Rottnest Island, if you look at obscured records, then all the scrambled locations are in the middle of the ocean, which the quokka obviously isn't there. So obscuration, there are situations where obscuring the record isn't helpful if within the big box it gets scrambled into, there's really only one place it can be anyway. Does that make sense to everyone? So if you had a rare orchid that only grows in this single tiny patch of bush, and then all around that bush is desert, and I uploaded a photo of that rare orchid, then it doesn't matter where the location gets randomly scrambled into, it's obvious that it's only in the bush and it's not in the desert. So in cases like that, that's where you can set it to private. The only downside with setting it to private is that it makes it really, really hard to find your observation for obvious reasons, because it's completely unsearchable by location. Now, let's say I've got 5 photos of this spider and I want to combine them all into one observation, right? So anytime you take multiple photos, so multiple photos of the one thing are great, but it's important that if you've got multiple photos of the same individual, they all have to be one observation, not 5 observations. So if I've got my 5 photos here, they're all of the same spider, I literally just pick one up and drag it onto another one. And that now combines the photo into that observation. Pick up the next one, drag it, pick it up, drag it, pick it up, drag it. I've now got one observation with 5 photos attached. And the important thing to note is that whichever photo you want to appear first, that's the one that you drag the others onto. So whichever photo you want people to see when you upload the observation, you want them to see that as the first photo. Make sure you don't drag that one you drag all the others onto that observation. And it's picking which photo appears first. It's not just about which photo you think looks the best and which photo you think has the best angle to ID. That's the photo that will also get used by the computer vision when it's suggesting identifications. So if you've got a really clear photo of the organism, and then you've got maybe some really close-up ones to show small features, it's probably best to put the photo of the entire organism first if you intend to use the computer vision for suggestions, because that computer vision will only work on that first photo. Any questions so far? So let's just add a couple more photos here. I'll just pick some random ones. So let's say I've added in all these photos as well. Now I took all these photos at the same location. And instead of having to type in the same location 19 different times, I can set the location to all of them simultaneously. So if you want to set multiple details to multiple observations, just tick this select all button and go to the left-hand side, and whatever location I enter will now be applied to every single one of those photos. So I go update. You'll notice that all of these observations now have the same location. I can do the exact same thing for date and the same thing for species name. So that's just something to keep in mind, that if you're uploading 10 or 20 observations and you took them all at the same time, well, I should say at the same date, and they're all from the same place, you don't have to manually type in that date or place 15 or 20 times. You can do it all at once. Another really useful thing is, so let's pretend that this photo of the spider had a little mite on the photo as well. And I wanted to have two observations, one for the spider and one for the mite. Instead of going back to my computer and adding photos and doing the whole process again, I can just click on the observation, press duplicate, and it creates an exact copy with all of the exact details as the first observation. So this kind of thing is most useful with, say, birds. So if you're going out and you're bird watching on the beach, and say there's a big flock of birds and it's a mixture of silver gulls and great crested terns. Now, instead of having to crop that photo and then upload the new photo and enter all the details again, all I can do is just upload one copy of the photo and then press duplicate. All the location information will be the same. All the date information will be the same.
Oh, can everyone hear me? I think we've lost audio. Sorry, Thomas. I think we've lost you.
We have lost
frozen.
Thomas as well.
It's frozen. All right. So I think what he was about to say was you can actually put everything together and have them as batches. It is a lot easier to do this if you are on the mobile, on the iNaturalist page.
Yeah.
Let's just see if we can get Thomas back in.
I'll just run through a bit explanation while we're waiting for Thomas to join. What he would be doing there is, I'll just bring me up, is because you might have the same picture, you're taking a picture where you've got several species within the same picture. You might want to duplicate the project, and then you can probably even sort of snipe off a little bit so you can actually see the particular species. Sometimes I'll make an observations where I'll have 2 or 3 species involved, particularly with like birds, where you have a bird feeding on something, such as a parrot might be feeding on a eucalypt. So you can take a picture of the parrot and the tree and upload the observations. And then you can actually make 2 observations from the same thing. And these, hang on a second. I'm just getting a message from Thomas saying that everything's just crashed out. Yeah, so you can, then that's quite useful for things like the Hungry Parrots project, which is a project run out of Australia, for those of you not local, where they're interested in seeing not only what parrots are about, but what they're feeding on. Whether they're feeding on a particular type of eucalypt, or are they feeding on like hakeas or grasses or things like that, to get a bit of an idea as to their biology and gather more information and extract a lot more information out of these observations than just the single thing of seeing the bird. So when I do observations now, what I often do is I could do 2 or 3 observations from the one photograph, because you'll have a bird, you might even have an insect in there, and you'll have a flower. And then you can add things like bark or gum nuts for a eucalypt, or some information about the form or function of the plant as well. This is also useful for other projects like this. So there's a project run out of Australia called Pollinators, and they now have a bit of a platform on iNaturalist, and you can upload observations on iNaturalist any time of the year and just adding them to these particular projects. And you'll have to add a few qualifiers like what they're feeding on. Is it a native or is it an exotic? And then with that same photograph, you can actually make 2 or 3 observations, because you'll have 2 or 3 species in the one picture. Hey, Thomas, you're back.
Yeah, the blokes out the front are digging up the NBN cables.
Oh, lovely.
Which is helpful. So I've swapped out. I'm hotspotting from my phone now.
Okay,
So
no
that shouldn't cut out.
I just sort of popped in and mentioned that a good use for this sort of thing would be something like Hungry Parrots Project, where you take a picture of a bird feeding on a plant.
Yeah.
And you can make 2 observations out of that. And I was just talking about pollinators as well. But
yeah, definitely.
I'll hand this back to you now and be quiet.
I'll just quickly answer Margot's question. So iNaturalist does not accept video at all. What you can upload are GIFs. So if you have a really short video of some kind of interesting behavior, like say it's like a wasp parasitizing a spider, or a bird popping in and out of a hole in a tree, what you can do is you just Google video to GIF converter online, and you can turn your video into a short GIF, and you can actually upload that. And then there's even a specific project you can add it to called Animated Observations. And that's a really cool project. But yeah, apart from that, images and sound files only, unfortunately. So I'll just share my, Stephen, you'll have to let me share my screen. In terms of anything you can't upload in regards to pictures, what do you mean? Do you mean in terms of file sizes or the actual content of the photos? So pretty much, it has to have evidence of an organism in it. So every photo that gets uploaded to iNaturalist needs to have, wait, sorry, let me share my screen. So every photo uploaded to iNaturalist needs to have some kind of focus. So an organism has to be the focus. So you can't upload a photo, well, you can, but I wouldn't upload a photo of, say, a landscape scene, because that's not really focusing on an organism. On top of that, oh, am I muted? No, I'm not muted. On top of that, you have to have evidence, or recent evidence of an organism is another requirement. So fossils aren't really something that you want to be uploading to iNaturalist. They'll get downvoted. You can upload sounds, so sound files are completely okay. I think the preferable format is M4A. So if you take a video with your phone or your camera, it's usually going to be in either MOV or MP4 format. And what you need to do is convert that to sound only, which you'll usually do with M4A. So a really good site that I use. So you guys, I'll post the link in the chat. This is the one I normally use, Cloud Convert. So I've posted that link in the chat. So whenever I take videos on my phone or my camera, I just upload the video to this site, and it converts it to a sound only file for me. And then I can upload that file. But again, that has the 20 megabyte size limit. So you can't upload really long videos. So you will have to trim those. Yeah, pretty much in terms of content for photos, you can upload whatever you like, whether it's the blurriest, most terrible photo that you've ever taken in your entire life. I upload plenty of those. Or if it's a super crisp photo, whatever organism you want is completely fine. Really, the only restrictions are that it has to be under 20 megabytes for the file size, and it has to show some kind of evidence of an organism. So if it's so unbelievably blurred that you can't even tell that something is in the photo, it's probably something to avoid uploading. So, but in cases where, let's say you see a butterfly go past and you recognize the butterfly with the naked eye, and it's a species that you've never seen before, you're really excited and you want to record it for your life list, but it went by so fast that you either didn't manage to get a photo or you got a photo, but it's so blurry, it's completely unidentifiable. You can still upload that record without a photo. So what you can do is you go over to the left-hand side of the screen here and you click add, and you can click observation without media. And you can actually add in a record. The whole purpose of doing something like that is adding it for your life list, pretty much. So you have, it won't be seen by other people by default, and it will remain as casual. It can never reach research grade. Obviously, people can never add a confirming ID because there's no proof, but it's a really nice way of adding observations for your personal life list. So I do that a lot. For example, I went on a big trip to the outback for uni a few years ago, and that was before I joined iNaturalist. And I saw a lot of really cool birds that I hadn't seen before and haven't seen since. And I didn't have my camera with me at the time, so I had no photos. So what I've done is I've added them to iNaturalist just as casual records without photos, just so whenever I want to look at my big list and I want to see, okay, how many bird species have I seen? They're still added to that list. I'm just going to check the chat. More questions? The photo doesn't need to be landscape. Good question from Sue. Photo can be portrait, landscape, cropped, whatever weird size, but there is a maximum size limit, which is 2088 pixels by something. And if your photo is bigger than that, then iNaturalist will automatically resize it. So you don't need to worry about keeping it down, but do note that if you have like some massive photo that you've taken with, say, panorama mode or something like that, iNaturalist will resize it when you upload it. So it doesn't need to be landscape, can be portrait. So I think I've covered enough with the upload screen. I wanted to get on, spend more time than I would have liked on that bit. So I will do some other things. Most of the time when you want to look for things, most people will click the explore screen. So this is probably the most common screen that people will use. So this is basically every single observation on iNaturalist is on this window. So when you click explore, and you have this really awesome set of filters here where you can filter the data to show whatever you like. So you can filter for things like, if I only want to see research grade observations, for example, then it will only show me ones that are research grade. And I might want to do that if I want to go through and perhaps correct mistakes that other people have made. Alternatively, I might want to only look at needs ID, right? So maybe I want to only go through and identify things that still need a confirming identification, and I can click needs ID. You can click any set of filters here. So there's a filter for threatened. So the threatened filter will only show you observations of things that are near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. Alternatively, I can actually tick this box and only look at observations of introduced organisms. So let's say, let's set the location to New South Wales. So right now, I'm looking at observations that are in New South Wales of introduced species. So right now on iNaturalist, 470 different non-native invasive species have been seen in New South Wales. I can look at things like has sounds, has photos. I can type it. This is a really nice one. So this description tags. So let's say that I'm looking at New South Wales and I'm interested in looking at caterpillar photos, or at least larvae of moths and butterflies. So I can type in caterpillar And what this does is it brings up every single observation that's somewhere in the observation, the word caterpillar is mentioned. So whether that's in the description, whether it's in a comment, whether it's in an annotation or an observation field, if the word caterpillar is mentioned somewhere in an observation, it's in this set. So I can do the same thing for, say, egg. So every single one of these observations has the word egg somewhere in it. And some of them may seem a little bit dodgy, and you may think, oh, that doesn't seem like it has the word egg in it. But that also includes different names. So I'm pretty sure Dilwinia retorta, another common name for it is eggs and bacon. So that's why it's showing up in the egg search. So that, as I said, that filter, looking at this word, it applies to anything. So it applies to all the names that apply to that species. As I said, anywhere in the description, any comments, any tags, any ID. You can also search for observations that are only by a certain person. You can search for observations that are only in a project. You can search for observations by different photo licensing, date added, date observed, different taxa, of course. A useful thing is this sort by. So by default, observations are arranged from newest to oldest. So looking at these observations in New South Wales, this one at the top left-hand corner is the most recent thing uploaded for New South Wales. So you can see 5 minutes ago. And the one all the way at the bottom, so if I go through all 376,000 observations, when I get to the last one, that will be the very first observation that was uploaded. But if I want to look at it in reverse order and look at the oldest stuff first, then I go to filters and I can go sort by, date added, and I can change it to ascending. And what that does is it shows me the oldest observations from New South Wales first. So immediately you can see here, 11 years. So this photo was uploaded 11 years ago. It's also important to note that this little date here, 11 years, 12 years, 11 years, 18 years, that's not when the observation was uploaded, it's when the photo was observed. So a lot of the times those things are roughly equivalent. Like for example, whenever I take any photos when I'm out on a trip, I'll pretty much upload them that afternoon or the next day at the latest. But some people have huge databases of photos on their computer from 5, 10, 20 years ago. And so that's the date that will show up in this little left-hand corner, keep in mind. So how should plant weeds or introduced species be noted on your observations? So if you upload a photo of a weed, you don't really need to do anything. It will automatically be tagged as introduced by the system. So what happens is, so if I go, so if I, we'll use New South Wales as another example. So if I type up New South Wales here in this explore bar, and I go to About, this takes me to the About page for the location New South Wales in iNaturalist. And let's say I click on Apis mellifera, so the European honeybee. And on the left-hand side here, it says establishment means introduced. So what that means is anytime someone uploads a photo of a European honeybee in New South Wales, it will automatically be tagged as introduced. Hopefully that answers that question. There were a few other questions in the chat. So from Margot, sounds like it's, so Margot said, sounds like it's good to add tags to act as prompts for verification. So yeah, so you're more than happy to add tags, or you can just add things in the description. Another useful thing is the annotations. Yeah, and as Stephen said, with COVID, a lot more people are uploading historic observations. It's very true. So let's say I go to one of my butterfly observations. And I find one of my observations of a caterpillar. So I'll go to this one. On the right-hand side, so any observation you go to, on the right-hand side, there are 3 main annotations. And these change a little bit depending on what you're looking at. But the first one is alive or dead, and you have an option of putting alive, dead, or cannot be determined. So generally, if I have an observation of something that's alive, I won't really bother ticking alive for that because I'd be doing it thousands of times. But let's say I find I'm out on a bushwalk and I find a dead bird, I will usually tick dead. And then that way, if people are specifically wanting to search for dead birds, then it makes it easier for them to find my observation. So for example, I know there are a few people that are on iNaturalist doing research on birds hitting windows and dying. And so they're looking at how they can reduce mortality rates in birds hitting windows. And so one thing that they do is they search through all the observations that are birds and that have been annotated with this dead value. So obviously ticking that dead value makes it easier for those people to find that kind of data. You can also add a value for sex, so female, male, or cannot be determined. And you can also add life stage. So life stage will change depending on what you've uploaded. So for example, if you upload a dragonfly, I can check that right now. I believe there's a teneral option as well. So again, make sure you guys interrupt me at any time if you want me to repeat something or if I'm going too fast. I'm just conscious that we haven't got much time left. Yeah, so it'll change. So you'll notice here for this dragonfly observation I have, I've got 4 options for life stage. I've got egg, I've got nymph, I've got teneral, and teneral is when an adult has just molted and just emerged as an adult, and it's still hardening up. So you have the teneral option for things like cicadas as well. And then you've got adult. So Ed has said, iNaturalist says Corymbia torreliana is a tree of the Corymbia genus native to the Australian state of Queensland. Yeah. However, that native species is a weed in southeast Queensland. Okay, so that's a really great question. So yeah, you get cases where species can be native to Australia, but then invasive to other places. So there's 2 situations I'll discuss here. One is where you have a native Australian species that gets transported to other places in Australia. So for example, the pincushion hakea, which a lot of you probably, it's a flower that you guys know about, really awesome. As the name suggests, it looks just like the flower, it looks just like a pincushion, and that's from Western Australia. But it's been introduced into Victoria and South Australia. So whilst it's native to Western Australia, it's actually a weed in other parts of Australia. So what you can do there is you can actually change the establishment means. And I'll show you how to do that. And with the case that Ed brings up here, you can also have mistakes, right? So you can have something listed as native, but that's a mistake from someone somewhere and it's actually a weed. So if you want to change the establishment means, so what I'll do is I won't change it myself here, but I'll show you how to change it because I'll have to look that up afterwards. So let's say I type in Corymbia torreliana. So I'll copy that and I'll go to Queensland. So what I'll do is I'll go up to the explore bar here. I will type in Queensland and I will go to about. So this takes me to the page for Queensland and shows all the different species that have been observed in Queensland. So in the search bar, I'll type in Corymbia torreliana and I'll search for that. And here it is. And I'll click Corymbia torreliana. And if I scroll down on the left here, it says establishment means unknown. So if I wanted to change that to introduced, all I would have to do is click edit. And then here again, it says establishment means, and I'll click edit again. And from the drop-down menu, I can change that to introduced. And then I press save. And then that is now, every time someone uploads an observation of Corymbia torreliana in Queensland, it will be automatically tagged as introduced. And anyone can do that. So you don't have to be a curator on the site. Anyone can change the establishment means, whatever time you like. So I won't change that one for now, but that's one I will put on my to-do list to look at afterwards. Because I am definitely not a plant person, so it may, maybe it's native to other parts of Queensland, but only specifically in southeast Queensland is it a weed. In which case I'll have to do a bit more complex stuff to make sure it's only set as a weed in southeast Queensland. So was that clear to everyone how to change the establishment means of things? So you just go to this bar, you search for the place name, you search for the species. Awesome. Glad I could help, Ed. Another thing I'll talk about is changing photos. So if you ever encounter a, let's just search for a random species. So let's say I search for this seashell, and actually, let's click the about page. So let's say I'm browsing seashells on iNaturalist, and I come across this one, and I realize that this photo is incorrect. So so this photo is correct for this species, but let's just pretend this is the wrong photo. Let's say this is a completely different species and this is the wrong one. You can change these photos at whatever time you like. So again, you don't have to be a curator on the site. Any user can change this photo. So if I want to change the photo for here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down. On the right-hand side, there's a button that says curation. I'm going to click the down arrow for that button. I'm then going to click the drop-down option that says edit photos. And I can now drag photos from the left to the right and remove photos from the right by clicking the X. So does that make sense to everyone? So if this photo was, let's just pretend it's the incorrect photo and it does not show this species, I would click the X here and it would remove it from the pool. And then I would drag one of these photos over to the left. That was correct. And then you just press save photos and the photo will change. So does that make sense? So these are just different ways of interacting with the site.
Sorry, doesn't that open that up to possible people coming in that have got bad intentions and just ruining photos and things that have been loaded up? Is there anything that prevents that happening?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there are some groups where the photos have actually been locked. So for example, I'm pretty sure, as just a one-off example, humans. So if you type in human, the photo for human, I am pretty certain is actually locked right now, and I can't change it. And test that. Yep, there we go. So if you go to the drop-down taxa, the photos are locked. But as you say, there is really nothing stopping people from, stopping vandals from coming through and maliciously changing things. However, if that kind of thing does happen, it's really noticeable. You tend to become familiar with the photos that are the little thumbnails all the time. And people tend to recognize them. So if something does get changed, chances are within 2 or 3 minutes, someone will change it back to something proper. So unfortunately, apart from photos being locked, there isn't really any mechanism from stopping people just going through and changing whatever they like. But I guess it kind of relies on just assuming everyone has goodwill. And if they're changing photos, that they're not doing it maliciously. One thing I want to talk about briefly is identifications. So whenever I used to identify things for people at first, I would always do it via the Explore page. So I would click Explore, I'd then put in my location. So I usually ID stuff from Australia. So I would click Australia. And then what I would have to do is I'd have to either click on each one and then it opens up a new page. And then I make my ID and then I have to click back and go all the way back to this and then click the next one, or open things in new tabs and go to each one and ID it, which is really, really time consuming. Yeah, exactly like Randy said. So it's just like Wikipedia where things can get changed, but people are watching stuff fix them pretty quickly. This is a really time consuming process. So identifying things using this Explore page is really time consuming. So what I want to introduce to you guys, and not a lot of people use this site actually, a lot fewer than I thought, is the Identify page. So if you click the Identify page, it's exactly the same as the Explore page, but better for identifying things, that is. So if you're just interested in browsing through photos, or if you want to maybe ID one of your own observations, and you want to do that by comparing it with other things people have seen, Explore is great. But if you're actually looking to identify things for other people, the Identify screen is far superior. So I have my set of filters exactly as I do on the Explore page. So I can set it to whatever group of animals I want or plants. I can set it to any series of date observed or date uploaded. I can set it to only have sounds, only have photos, whatever filter you like. So let's say I set it to Australia. Make it set to Australia. So now it's only showing observations from Australia. Then let's say I just want to look at birds. So this screen is now only showing photos of birds from Australia. And something that you notice straight away is there's this really handy big agree button, right? So I don't even need to open this observation. If it's something easy, so straight away from this little thumbnail, I can see that this is a Southern bowerbird. I just hit agree. And then now if we go to the observation, my identification has been added. So it turns identifying from a really cumbersome process that can take a lot of clicks, a lot of opening new windows, to literally the click of a single button. Now, obviously, with some things, you may need to click it. So for example, this bird, yeah, it looks like a Southern bowerbird, but its head is cut off in the little thumbnail. So let's just click it and see the whole photo. I can see it's a Southern bowerbird. I just click agree. And now my ID has been added. And I can literally just go through and hit agree. And I'm making an ID every second. And it comes with this handy little magnifying glass. So you can click on the photo and zoom in. If you want to see something closer, and then zoom back out. There's a really cool feature as well. You see there's this little sun symbol. So sometimes, let's say I'm taking a photo of a bird and the bird was silhouetted against the sun and it was really dark. And I'm trying to identify this observation for someone, but I can't really make out any features. If I click this plus and minus, I can actually increase or decrease the brightness of the observation. So I don't use that often, but it's quite handy for if people upload observations that are either overexposed or underexposed. As I said, an example is if you take a photo of, say, a kite or a hawk that's flying overhead and it's silhouetted against the sun, you can use these plus and minus buttons to actually decrease and increase the brightness and help you identify it better. Another really nice feature of this screen is that I can easily swap from one observation to the next with just a single click of a button. So if I click the left or right arrow keys, it moves from observation to observation. So literally a single click of the left and right key on my keyboard, and it moves from observation to observation. So that's instead of having to constantly open new tabs or click on an observation and then go back to the page you're on. Any questions about the identify screen so far? Or is that pretty clear? So that's a really nice feature. You'll notice that there are also a whole lot of other really handy shortcuts. So if you're on an observation, if you go down to the left-hand corner and click on this little keyboard symbol, it shows you all the shortcuts, all the hotkeys that exist for these observations. So let's say I'm going through a whole lot of observations and it's someone that has gone through their backyard and is uploading a whole lot of photos of all their pot plants. And it's clear that they're all captive or cultivated. On every single one of those observations, all I have to do is press X and it automatically ticks the captive cultivated button for me. Just look at the chat. Z zooms in on your photos. Yeah, so these are all just ways of really quickly going through hundreds or thousands of observations and only using your keyboard. So those are really handy. Also, you'll notice on your screen when it brings it up, there's this really cool tab called Suggestions. And what it does is it suggests different species you could see that it could be based on perceived similarities. So we'll go to this hornbill one. Here we go. So this suggests species it could be based both on location and that it looks similar. So obviously there's an ID already on this one, but if you came to an observation and let's say I wasn't sure and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I'm not really sure what bird this is and I don't know where to start. You go to Suggestions and it offers two things that it thinks it is based on, as I said, both the similarity of the photo and the location. You also have this Annotations tab, which is where you can fill in these annotations for other people. So let's say I'm going through all these caterpillar photos. I'm able to add juvenile, or in the case of a caterpillar, it would be larva, to other people's caterpillar photos, not just mine. So all of these annotations you can add to other people's observations as well, not just yours. And then finally, you've got data quality. And the data quality tab is where you can tick things like location is accurate, you can upvote it or downvote it, organism is wild, whether there's evidence of organism. So for example, if you've got someone uploading a photo of a dolphin, but they've set the location to the middle of the desert in Australia, clearly something's gone wrong, the location isn't accurate. So in that case, what I would do is I would add a comment and I'd say, could you please check your location? And in the meantime, I would downvote location is accurate. And what that does, and I'll just downvote it and then undo that here, you'll notice it sets the observation to casual. So as soon as any of these options in this data quality list are downvoted, it automatically sets the observation to casual. So if you accidentally do that, all you have to do is just click on the button again and it undoes it. So if you are looking at identifying things for people, I would highly recommend using the identify screen rather than the explore screen. It's a lot faster, gives you a lot more options. And then once you're done identifying everything on this page, you just click the refresh button, and what it does is it gets rid of all the ones that you've reviewed. So you notice all of those ones that I just added an ID to, they're no longer in the pool, and that's the default. So that's why it's another really handy way of doing things. Because if I'm just looking, if I'm in the explore screen, and let's say I'm looking in Australia, and I'm looking at mollusks, every time I search Australian mollusks, the same ones are going to keep turning up for me, whether I've already added an identification to them or not. And if I've already identified something, then I'm not really interested in seeing it again, right? Whereas if you're on the identify screen, once you have added an identification to something, it will no longer show up for you when you search again. I mean, you can change it by ticking this reviewed box. If I tick this reviewed box, I will see things, see? So all the ones that I've ID'd have come back. But if I untick that, I'm only seeing things which I have not identified yet, which is really handy if I don't want to just keep looking at the same thing over and over. Now I'm aware we're rapidly running out of time. So what I'll do is I'll just explain one more thing, and then I think I'll open it up to just general questions from people. So let's say I upload a photo of, actually I'll use my huntsman. So this is a huntsman that I photographed in my house last night, all right? And let's say I know what the genus is. So I know that it's Heteropoda, but I'm not sure what species it is, and I want to try and identify it. What I'll do is I'll go to the Explore tab. I'll just bring up the question that someone just asked. All right, well, if people are okay with it, I might go a little bit over time. If you have to be elsewhere, that's fine. But if you're happy to stick around, I might go a little bit over time just to explain a few more things. So I'll go to the Explore screen. I'll type in Heteropoda, giant huntsman spiders, and I saw this in New South Wales. So I'll set the location to New South Wales. It's not being responsive. Hello. All right, so sometimes the Explore screen is quite buggy. That's another issue with it. So often you have to refresh the screen. Okay, there we go. So if I got Heteropoda, New South Wales, and we can see, well, there's only 2 species, okay? And so if I click on the species tab, it shows me 2 different options. And to my eye, they both look identical, right? So, but this is a really nice way of comparing different things that are in your state or whatever area you choose. So let's say, for example, I found a limpet, okay? And I know that it's some kind of true limpet, and I saw it in New South Wales, and I want to identify it. Again, this screen will show you all the different limpets that have been observed in New South Wales thus far, and I can compare. The one thing to remember is that these are just the thumbnail images, so they're just one representative. So if I use this limpet here, Paddlelotomorphia, as an example, not every individual will look like that. So to have a look at all of them, I click this little observations link here. All right, so I'll answer those questions in 1 second. But yeah, so you can see that these observations, they all look a little bit different. So it's the same general pattern, but they can look different based on erosion and things like that. So the explore screen is a really nice way of comparing things. I'll quickly answer those questions and I'll go back to what I said. So Sue said, sometimes weird observations are correct. The VBA has a record of a land mammal in Port Phillip Bay. There's a flying fox on something like a post above the water. So yeah, that's a really good point. So it's always a good idea to zoom in and actually look at the observation and consider whether it could be there. And remember that sometimes the case like that is because it's obscured as well. So there are a lot of grey flying fox observations around Sydney that are over the water. Now, some of those would, of course, be flying foxes that just happen to be flying over the water. But a number of those are also where the location has been obscured. So people saw them in somewhere like Centennial Park or the Royal Botanic Gardens. But then when the observation was obscured, it got bumped out over the ocean. And then Carol said, if I lose internet access, can I still record an observation using the app? You can. As Randy answered, you can. And then just once you get the internet later, you can upload it. One thing I will note with the phone, maybe this is just, I don't know whether this is just an iPhone thing, because the iPhone app does tend to be a lot crappier than the Samsung app. As one example, if you're using the iPhone app for iNaturalist, you can't actually upload sounds using your phone. Whereas the Samsung version, you can upload sounds on your phone. But with the iPhone app, I actually find that my camera, the base camera on my phone, takes better quality photos than the camera through iNaturalist. So I don't know whether other people have experienced that, but I actually don't use the iNaturalist app to take photos at all. I only use my camera normally, and then I upload them into the app afterwards. Yeah, Amanda, go ahead and ask your questions now.
Okay, thanks. The first one is, are the pictures copyrighted? Are we able to copy any of the pictures that we find here? Say, for instance, if someone's asking about a certain thing and we want to give an example, can we use pictures from here? And the second one is, if you do make your observations private, are you able to share them with someone that's also listed on the community here?
All right,
rather than broad spread?
Yep, good question. So the first one in terms of copyright and using people's photos. So if you go to any observation, so let's say that someone wanted to use this huntsman photo I took and share it on Facebook or something. What you do is you go to the photo and there's 3 little buttons here. What you do is you click the one that says CC, and you click that and it will show the copyright information for that photo.
Okay, great.
For this photo, so most people, including me, set them to some rights reserved. And generally, so each one, you can obviously look up exactly what all the laws are and what each of these copyright definitions mean. But generally, some rights reserved is that you can use the photo whenever you like, as long as it is not for commercial gain, and as long as you acknowledge the person as having taken the photo.
Okay, cool.
So pretty much anyone, because of the copyright license that I have set to my photos as some rights reserved, and please anyone correct me if I'm wrong, this is my interpretation, is my understanding of it, is that anyone can use any of my photos at any time, as long as they are not gaining money from them, and as long as they acknowledge me as the photographer, then it's completely fine. However, this is why you should always check. Some people set their observations to all rights reserved. in which case, in order to reproduce or use their photo in any way, you must have permission from them. Otherwise, it is a breach of copyright. Now, generally, those cases I've noticed a lot of times, generally people are professional photographers, and the photos that they're uploading to iNaturalist, they're perhaps also selling copies of them on their website. So in cases like that, it would make sense to set all rights reserved, because if those images are freely available on the web, then they're potentially losing out on money. They're losing out on sales. So it's always worthwhile, if you want to share a photo, just check what the copyright information is. And, you know, just as a general rule, even if it does say some rights reserved, I'll just generally ask that person's permission to share it in a lot of the cases anyway, just as a means of courtesy. But you are under no obligation to ask them if it is some rights reserved, as long as, I said, you're not gaining money and as long as you acknowledge them as a photographer.
Okay, so briefly, given that, could you just briefly show us how we would actually contact somebody then?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, great.
So if you want to message any person on iNaturalist, then you just need to know what their username is. So let's say I want to message Pete, who's in the call. I know that his username is Possum Pete. Yeah, and I'll answer Margot's one in 1 second as well. So let's say I want to message Pete about something. What I do is I go up to this little envelope symbol at the top right-hand corner, click on that. I go view your inbox, and then I go new message, and then I start typing in that person's username, and then Possum Pete comes up, and then I can type whatever message I like to him.
Okay, great, thanks.
Alternatively, I can just literally go straight to Possum Pete's profile page, and there's an option to message him there as well. So that's how you can send personal messages to people. So Randy just put a good link in the chat, and that tells you all you need to know about Creative Commons licenses and what each of the licensing levels actually mean in terms of permission to use those photos. So Margot asked the question, can you explain the 2/3 in community taxon? Also, what if you disagree with an ID suggestion? Okay, so that's a really great question. So the way iNaturalist works, whenever I upload an observation and I put in an ID, so we'll go to this one, bring up this one as well. Okay, so this is a photo of a bird mite that I uploaded yesterday. Now, at the moment, I'm the only one that has added an identification to this. So at the moment, it's needs ID. Whereas if we go to another example of this plant I took a photo of last week, multiple people have ID'd, so it's now research grade. And the way something moves from needs ID to research grade is that more than 2/3 of the people identifying need to agree on the identification. So in this case, we have 3 people have added an ID, myself, Raina, and Adrian. All 3 agree, so 3 out of 3 is equal to 1, which is more than 2/3. Therefore, the observation is research grade. However, let's say I had added my ID, Raina came along and he agreed with me, but then Adrian came along and added a different ID. You now only have 2 out of 3 IDs agreeing, which is not more than 2/3. It's only equal to 2/3. Therefore, it will not be research grade. So does that make sense to everyone? So an observation has to have more than 2/3 of all the people that have added an ID in agreement with each other for it to be research grade. As soon as you get equal to 2/3 or under 2/3 of people agreeing, it will remain at needs ID. And what it will do is it will move down to the lowest common taxonomic level.
Can you only give him a very small dinner so we can feed him in the morning? Thanks.
So that makes sense to everyone? So if Adrian had come along and suggested a different species in the same genus, then this observation would move to needs ID, and it would be set at Xanthosia because all the IDs are in the same genus, but they're disagreeing at a species level. So, but they'll all be displayed as Xanthosia overall. But if Adrian had come along and let's say he'd made an ID that was like a completely different plant, it was like a Banksia he thought it was, or a Grevillea, then the overall ID will be, well, I'm not sure what the lowest common, let's just say it's flowering plants, but it'll probably be like dicots or something. But the ID will just always go to the lowest common denominator. Okay, so that's how the IDs work. And there was another question in the chat from Randy. So Randy said, research grade observations have to be at the species level. So normally, yes, actually anything below family can be at research grade. And the way you do that, so normally only ones that are at species will go to research grade automatically. But there is a way to make things that are at genus or subgenus or subfamily or tribe or any taxonomic level below family go to research grade. And that's by going right to the bottom of this observation and clicking this no, it's as good as it can be box. So you notice the question above it says, based on the evidence, can the community taxon still be confirmed or improved? And if you tick no, and the observation is sitting at subfamily or below, it will actually move it to research grade, regardless of whether it's at species or not. Now, why would you want to use this? Well, if we're using invertebrates as a really good example, there are many, many groups of invertebrate where you can ID them down to genus from photos, but species identifications are actually impossible without either dissecting them or looking at genitals under the microscope or getting DNA samples. Okay, so a really nice example is Dolomites. So Dolomites is a genus of water spider in Australia, and there are a couple of species that you can identify, but in most cases, you can only get Dolomites down to genus from a photo. And in order to identify the species, you have to dissect the genitals. So in those cases, it is literally impossible to identify the species from a photo, okay? Unless, of course, your photo is of those dissected genitals. But if you are just taking a photo of the spider on the ground, it is not possible to get it to species. So if you had a case like that, then you could go down and you would tick this no, it's as good as it can be box. And even though it's only identified to the genus level, it will actually make it research grade. So that's a useful thing to have. So there's a couple more questions in the chat. Okay, so Ed just said, to recap on the identify screen, do you use that after you have uploaded a number of observations? In other words, is that the best way to deal with multiple observations from the same location? So the identify screen is largely for identifying things for other people, not for identifying your own things. You can still use it to identify your own things, but you have to change the filters because on the identify screen, the filters are automatically set up to exclude your own observations. So they'll only show observations from other people. So you will have to tinker with those observations, those filters a bit. So that identify screen is really only set up for you to identify things for other people as opposed to identifying your own things. All right, awesome. So that's clarified for Ed. The other thing that I wanted to just add with this identify screen is that there are different options for when you disagree. So if I go to suggest an identification, and let's say I'm going to suggest a different option, and I'm going to say it's Xanthosia genus. If I click done, that prompts me with two options, green and orange. And this is probably one of the biggest areas in iNaturalist where people get confused between the two options because they're worded a little bit confusingly. So it's really important to have these clear. So let's say I come across an observation of a Banksia, okay? And someone has said that it is Banksia integrifolia. And I look at that observation and I think, okay, that is definitely not Banksia integrifolia. I don't know which Banksia it is, but it is definitely not Banksia integrifolia. In that case, I would click this orange option, right? So it asks the question, is the evidence provided? So let's just pretend that this says Banksia integrifolia. Is the evidence provided enough to confirm this is Banksia integrifolia? And if I'm looking at that photo and I 100% know that it is a Banksia, but it's not Banksia integrifolia, I would click the orange option, which says no, but it is a member of genus Banksia. And what that will do is it will take the observation back to Banksia. But let's say I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, I'm not sure. It could be Banksia integrifolia, but it could be something else that's really similar, but I'm not sure. That's when you click the green option, because the green option says, I don't know, but I am sure this is genus Banksia. So the green option is for when you know it is that genus, but you can't 100% rule out that species. So you're unsure on the species. Whereas the orange option is for when you definitely know that it is not that species, but it is that genus. Does that make sense to people? Sing out if that doesn't make sense. You want me to explain that again. So this option, yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, good.
Awesome, awesome. So this option, that window only ever comes up if you are disagreeing with an ID someone else has made, but your disagreement is of a taxonomic level that is related. So for example, this is a plant. If I go to add an animal ID, then that option won't come up because animals are in a completely different kingdom of plants. But if I was to add an ID that was the same genus as this species, the same family, the same order, it will give me that option of saying, am I definitely sure that it's not this, or am I uncertain? And it could be this, but it might be something else. Okay, so that's when, so it's really important to get those options correct. I'll go through one last feature of the site that I wanted to talk about, and then I'll open it up to some questions. So the last one I wanted to talk about was how to edit URLs. So this is a really, really cool feature of iNaturalist. So we're going to set our location to Australia again. We're going to set our species to butterflies and moths. So let's say I wanted to look at all the photos in Australia. Actually, we'll set it to New South Wales, so it's a little bit more manageable with the number of observations. So at the moment in New South Wales, people have uploaded around 65,000 observations of butterflies and moths. And let's say I wanted to browse and just look at the butterflies. Okay, well, in that case, all I do is search for butterflies, and I can just pick butterflies because butterflies are a monophyletic group. Okay, but what happens if I only wanted to look at moths and I didn't want to look at butterflies? Well, moths aren't a monophyletic group. And what I mean by that is that all the different moth families and superfamilies aren't all united under one big taxon like butterflies are. So every single butterfly is all in this superfamily, Papilionadia. Right? So every single butterfly is in this superfamily. But you'll notice that if I type in moths, there is no group that contains all the moths because they're all different superfamilies. But there is a way around this. I can actually manually edit the URL to only see moths. So this is a really cool thing. So in order to do this, first, you need to know what the taxon ID for butterflies is because I want to exclude them. So what I mean by that is every single species or family or genus or anything that's on iNaturalist, it has an identifying number. So if I look up butterflies and I look at observations of butterflies, you'll notice that in the URL up here, it says taxon ID is equal to 47,224. So the taxon identification number for butterflies is 47,224. So if I go back to here, you'll notice that at the moment it says taxon ID equals 47,157. So the 47,157 represents butterflies and moths together, whereas the 47,224 represents only butterflies. So if I want to look at only moths, I go into the URL, and what I do, it's really annoying when this pops up. What I do is I go to the end of the URL and I type and without underscore taxon underscore ID equals, and then I type in that ID number for the butterflies. Is that 44 or 24? 24, yeah. enter. And now all the butterflies have disappeared. And you are now only looking at moths. So at any time, you can edit this URL to completely modify what you're looking at. And the reason this is so important is that this is not something that's available in those filters. So similarly, what I can do is, let's say I'm really interested in looking at grasshoppers. But let's say I'm also interested in looking at scorpions. Now, obviously, grasshoppers and scorpions are two different things, and there's no one group I could look up that would include both of them and only both of them. So what I need to do is I go to the top, and we can see that grasshoppers, they have an ID of 700,600. So what I do is I go and I look up scorpions, and I figure out what their ID is. So they have an ID of 48,894. So I go up to the top, I edit the URL, I change where it says taxon ID to taxon IDs, plural. I then add a comma, I add in that number, press enter. I'm now looking at all grasshoppers and scorpions in New South Wales simultaneously. So there are many, many ways that you can edit the URLs to see all kinds of things. And what I'll do is I'll give a link to you guys as well. So just in the chat. Okay, so Randy found a useful tool called GeoSetter that lets you take a track where you walk and then add the location to the photos later from the track by matching the time on your camera to a whole batch of photos. Yeah, so that's a really nice way of doing things. So pretty much, I'm going to post this link in the chat. So if you go to the forum, so the forum is this really nice like sister site to iNaturalist. And it's basically where if you have questions or cool things you want to discuss, you can post them in the forum. There's a really nice thread that has all tutorials. And there's a thread here, how to use iNaturalist URLs. And we're going to go to the top here. I'm going to post that for you guys in the chat. So this link has a huge set of instructions on all the different ways that you can edit the URLs. So you can search, as I said, you can search for multiple taxa at once. You can search for taxa by names or common names. You can search for observations with no identifications. You can search multiple places at once. You can search within a circle instead of a bounding box. You can search by geoprivacy, search by number, search by identifications, search for annotations, whatever you like, you can manipulate this URL to show exactly what you want. So there's a million and one more things I could still discuss, but I think I'll wrap things up there. It's a bit of an information overload, and just throw it up if anyone wants to ask any more questions or wants me to clarify anything I talked about. No worries, happy to help. So yeah, if any of you guys ever encounter any problems or you're unsure about something on iNaturalist or you get stuck with something, feel free to message me at absolutely any time. I'm the Beachcomber on iNaturalist. So if you have any problems with the site or if you're unsure about something, feel free to message me at any time and hopefully I can help. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps things up. If you wanted to say anything at all, Stephen or Michelle?
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks a lot, Thomas. That was really, really good. We had a few technical issues, but you can't help that. Yeah, no, that was a really, really good explanation, and I hope everyone found that useful. I think there was something there for everyone, something for those who have just started and those who have been around for a while and used it. I think that, you know, I've learned a few things, as I always do when you talk about these things. So yeah, very, very, very good. And we're going to have another one of these later on in the week, I think. for other people and those that missed. And thanks a lot again, Thomas. It's fantastic. I'm sure everyone enjoyed that.
No worries.
All right.
And that was ditto from me too. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Okay, guys. Well, I think we'll let Thomas get on with his day. And again, if you guys, I hope you guys join the event later in the month and have a really good time enjoying your nature. Okay, and we'll see and hear from you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. It was great.
Thanks, everyone.
They did. Thank you. Is the video going to be available, Michelle?
Yes, we're planning to. We'll see how it with technical difficulties.